As always, greetings to everyone and welcome to another episode of the Drive Face podcast. As usual, we have a very exciting package for you today, and as always, actually, which I'm sure you will enjoy. So, joining me on this episode is, of course, producer Rosheika Grant, which simply means it's the producer's corner. Of course, if you have never heard her before, you probably should listen to a few of the other episodes, and this certainly would be another good one. Of course, just a little introduction. She's a huge sport fan. Um, she says that she's a proud supporter of Chelsea FC. And at the point that we are recording, they're not really doing all that great in the Premier League. I suspect, she probably will say that recent results may suggest that they're moving up. But anyway, she knows a lot about sports, and hopefully we can have a great discussion today. She is a graduate of Carmack, and that's Carmack over there at the University of the West Indies. And Chica, welcome again.
Thanks for having me again, Dalton. Chelsea, I'll have you know, have picked up 7 points in their last 3 games with a new coach. We're on the up and up. We're 6th in the table at this moment. So, I think you should worry about Liverpool losing to Brighton and their streak ending at home. I think you should worry about that.
All right, so let's move right along. So in less than a month time, it will be officially a year since the COVID-19 case was identified in the Caribbean, and at different times in different parts of the Caribbean, certainly in Jamaica, hours came and a lot of lockdowns started to happen. And the impact on the state of sport cannot be understated. Few industries have seen such immediate impact as that seen in the professional sport and certainly the entertainment industry, in which the cancellation of a single event, competition, or even match has apparently placed severe and urgent strain on wages, payments, prize monies, and just in general livelihoods of stakeholders at all levels. Today we discuss the issues and challenges with the lack of competition or competitive sport in Jamaica and the Caribbean. And Rosheika and I are going to talk about this. Rosheika, since then we have not had too much sport in the entire Caribbean, and certainly in Jamaica where we're located, sport is still not allowed predominantly. We've had some track and field in the period, just a few. We have had some golf, but we've really been struggling. And Prime Minister Honorable Andrew Holness has stated that some sport will be coming back. But let's talk about that, Rosheika. How has the lives of athletes, you think, and other participants in sports change? And what new consideration will inform teaching and coaching and practice in the future, in what we consider as the new normal?
Well, a few weeks ago we had Donald on, and he spoke about how the lack of sports would have impacted him as a media broadcaster, as a sports broadcaster, commentator, who usually not just travels within Jamaica to work, but also within the region and internationally. And of course, that has not stalled, it has completely stopped within the last year. For a lot of our athletes, last year, 2020, would have been crucial to them either renewing their contract or landing that big contract after a good performance at Tokyo 2020. Of course, we are again at the same juncture that we were last year, where in March, Tokyo 2020 organizers were saying we are going ahead no matter what. We're at the same place again. And it's worrying because a lot of countries have gone into fresh lockdowns in the last few weeks. The UK is under lockdown. Several of our own Caribbean islands are under lockdown, which impacts the ability to train, the ability to compete, and the ability to export your talent. Because even though there aren't a lot of meets happening within the Caribbean, there are meets happening outside. But athletes are a bit reluctant to leave because you don't know what's going to happen in a few days, because you can leave the Caribbean to go and compete and not be able to re-enter your country. So there are a lot of considerations in terms of their livelihood, and also their social well-being and their mental well-being, because the uncertainty, I think, is what is affecting not just athletes but coaches, the persons that run these track clubs, the persons that run these cricket organizations, the amateur athletes who know they don't know what their future holds. So that's some of the impact that we've been privy to, and that we've seen unfolding, especially over the last 3 months, when we've seen competing outside of the Caribbean, but we're not seeing much competitions happening within the Caribbean.
And in a way, the the athletes locally, whether it's Trinidad, Jamaica, Grenada, Barbados, etc., are, as you rightly said, are going to be at a disadvantage in a big way, because their competitors are probably training full scale, are in competition. We have indoor meets now in the US and, well, the American series, but also you have World Athletics having their World Indoor Series, where most of our athletes who are training locally can't get to compete. And most of the the competitions out there, unless you're training outside of the Caribbean,
Yes.
it's difficult to get into those, and it does put them at a disadvantage, doesn't it?
It put them at a disadvantage, not just to compete at the international events, but also to qualify for them. A lot of we
Right.
have in Jamaica, we have a lot of athletes that would have already achieved the qualifications for Tokyo 2020. However, we have young athletes that are trying to compete in Carif. We're at a disadvantage because of the qualifications, not just for our professional athletes, but also for our junior athletes. There are major sporting events still on the calendar that have not been postponed or cancelled yet for 2021, and they have not competed for more than a year. So that's one of the issues that they face. Young athletes are also not just cricketers, not just track and field athletes, but also cricketers, footballers, who would have been looking to export their talent in exchange for a formal education abroad through scholarships. They are also not able to show what they're made of because they have not competed in a year. So those are the disadvantages that our amateur athletes face. For professional athletes, you have Commonwealth Games next year, World Championships, Olympic Games, and they have not been able, outside of the 7 meets that were held last year, there have not been meets that they have been able to perform at to be able to meet these qualification standards. So those are some of the advantages that they face in terms of qualifications. Additionally, Jamaica doesn't have a lot of facilities, and that puts us at a place where when we have lockdowns, or in our cases where we have curfews, athletes cannot come out as early as they usually do, and we already have a disadvantage there in terms of how many facilities are available, especially with social distancing protocols, how many athletes are able to train at a specific time, while our international counterparts may not necessarily have these issues. These are some of the things that within the region that we continue to face, especially as we have countries like Barbados that have their own strict curfews, etc. Now, St. Lucia this week just went into a state of emergency for 7 days, which will more than likely be extended. So we have athletes that already were at a disadvantage before the pandemic, that even more now, they are left way behind.
Yeah, man, and those are very good points. I think the overall challenges facing us across the region, because let's use Trinidad for example. They have some very strict protocol in place now in terms of their borders and persons either entering or exiting the borders. Barbados is going into a new phase of lockdown. Well, not lockdown, but COVID-19 protocols. Jamaica has been preventing flights from different spaces, and now we have the issues with Canada, which is a space that some people usually go for qualifications. So we're now having, as you rightly said, that issue of how are people going to be qualified, and sadly what may eventually happen, it seems, based on this discussion that you're saying, is if the Olympic go along, happen this year, some people may not get a chance to qualify for it, which would be devastating for some. And I'm not just talking about track and field now, obviously, because there are so many other sports uh, that are at risk. The other thing I wonder, though, Rosheika, since you're on that point, how long do you think we can continue this? How long can we continue not having sport in a way that we are not necessarily used to, but so that at least can like train and compete based on what you think? How long?
Well, a few weeks ago, the entertainment industry, well, a member of the entertainment industry put out a letter speaking about the importance of the entertainment personnel being able to get back to work. Similarly, I think that the sports stakeholders have been making a concerted effort towards making sure that we are centered in a conversation towards the pandemic is here. What are we going to do? I don't think we can go more than probably another few months before we actually have athletes that are not able to support themselves, and which means they will be turning to the government for assistance. The government that is already strained, the governments that are already strained across the Caribbean. So that's the issue. I don't think that we can go more than a few more months with these type of restrictions that not just restrict movement but also restrict livelihood. There are within Europe they have different tiers of how in terms of movement for athletes versus movement for normal civilians. I think that's where we probably will need to go, um, because for example athletes should be able to go out a little earlier in the mornings to be able to go and train, especially as I said we have the social distance protocols. Not everybody can train at the same time, or to go a little later. There has to be some sort of provisions from our regional government and our regional bodies to say that okay, we recognize that sport is important to our people and to the persons that depend on this for life.
Yeah, we're talking about the Olympics, Rosheika, but there's so much more to sport, isn't it? So, sport like cricket, that is not an Olympic sport. Netball is not an Olympic sport. Squash is not one either. Those are three. I wouldn't say squash is a big sport in Jamaica. It's one of those sports that we have been pushing out some talent. But cricket has been struggling in the region, and if we aren't able to have local training and competition, isn't that again one of the areas that you think we may just struggle in the future when this is all over, if it is ever over?
I agree. For the not so popular sports, well, I think cricket is still one of our more popular sports, but it's, as you said, it's struggling regionally. I think that this pandemic may be the blow, maybe one of those final blows that you see in movies, that may actually we see the lasting effect of it for another decade. There are a lot of young people that get introduced to certain sports through school, through physical activities. Of course, we've seen where we don't have, most Caribbean countries don't have schools happening in person right now, which means they aren't having physical education, and that puts us at a place where we're not discovering new talent. And for the last year we would have discovered new talent due to this disadvantage of the pandemic, and now we are going into another year without anyone being able to recruit, basically to scout for new talent, especially in these sports where a PE teacher may see someone bowl in a game and it's like, oh, let me recommend this person to the cricket coach. We don't have that opportunity. We also don't have the opportunity to expose them to competition where they can get into national teams and get into the regional team, because of course there is no competition happening. The regional super 50 is super 50, it's about to begin, but still those athletes are the ones that are already established. How will the younger athletes the younger cricketers get into the national squad when there are no competitions happening? How will a student who didn't know about squash before high school or table tennis learn about the sport when there is no PE? So this is one of the advantages that we will have. We will see the impact of on for years to come.
Mm. Um, Yeah, no, you're absolutely right because we have seen right across where sporting associations are saying this is really having a negative um, impact on the sport in general. We can't do anything about it, you and I, Rashika. Well, I don't know about you, but I certainly can't because this is a health crisis that we're having, a pandemic. But let me just ask you, let's talk about what are some of the opportunities that you think that this gives us. So, how can, let's start with the athletes first. How can they use this time to engage with their fans, whatever? What do you think would be some of the opportunities coming out of this? And let's start with the athletes first.
All right, okay, starting with the athletes, I think this is an opportunity to show your other side, basically, and also show us what goes into your day to day. Generally, starting around next month, athletes would have been out of the country for indoor competitions. They come back to Jamaica to get ready for their trials, then they're out of the country again until they come back after the major sporting championships. Of course, a lot of our athletes have been grounded for a year. Show us what you eat on a daily basis. Show us if you can cook. Show us if you have a dog. Show us what your day entails with your pet. Show us about your training because there are so many athletes that a lot of persons don't know their backstory, don't know what they're about, don't know their actual personality because you see them run it, do a 2 minute interview, and then that's it. This is a time to cement your brand, I believe, and this is a time to also and show another side of yourself. A lot of times Jamaicans are we tend to have want to we tend to think we have to be in a box, but we see other athletes outside of the region. They show so much about themselves, their families, etc. You can still maintain a private life, but now is the time to basically put your name out there because there are so many different opportunities in terms of commercial opportunities. We saw where Brianna actually she got what three major sponsorships in during a pandemic. Of course, she's a star athlete, an up and coming athlete, but she's always been pretty good using social media to as a platform to build out who Brianna is and who she wants persons to gravitate towards. And I think that's one of the major things I would love for athletes to do. For athletes for sports like cricket and table tennis, etc., I would use it as an opportunity to show people what is when I bring my girlfriends to 2020, they come because it's exciting and they can go and drink, but you can show them that this is a six or this is a four. Show them about different aspects of the sport that somebody that isn't actually a fan can learn about the sport as you go about, because there is a lot of downtime compared to what you usually have.
Yeah, and that is good. I think, boy, a lot of athletes have had to come out of their comfort zone to really do something else, do challenges, do and the challenges, guys, I'm talking about are push-up challenges, not the other ones that you guys are probably thinking about. It's really the push-up ones, right? Not just those, but they have been able to do docu-series, YouTube channels. I've seen more athletes coming up with YouTube channels showing their training because people never used to see them train. And those have been fantastic. Do you think, though, that the sporting bodies have used the opportunity now to do the same? And what do you think are some of the things that sporting organizations can use, since they can't put on events, they can't put on competition, they can't send athletes away? In your mind, what do you think are some of the recommendations and opportunities for sporting associations?
Well, a big opportunity that I think has been missed so far, but that can be rectified, is involving a lot of sport fans in the development of sport locally. We have what you've called many a times wagonist culture, but we also have fans that are true to the different sports that they follow locally. I believe that if you search social media, if you search the comments on any major newspaper, etc., you'll see people that are genuinely very passionate about sport development in Jamaica, reach out to young people, reach out to people that are interested in being a part of sports. So I think this pandemic would and still has an opportunity for a person to get more persons locally and regionally involved that aren't necessarily a part of the sport ecosystem now, but that can be useful and that can give a fresh perspective on how to do things. In terms of commercialization, I there have well initially there were a lot of different forums etc held by athletes speaking about the pandemic etc. I don't think enough sporting organizations did different types of not just forums, webinars, etc., to reach out to not just the athletes but the general public about how are we coping right now in the pandemic, how what are our plans as an organization to move forward, and also the commercialization of sports. How are we going to make our different sports more attractive to sponsors? We saw where the National Premier League, of course, faced. They were one of the organizations that they have actually rejuvenated in a pandemic. They've gotten sponsors they valued close to $100 million. That's not a simple thing to do, but to start fresh, I believe, is important, especially as it will be a new beginning whenever we do go back to what we won't be the same normal that we are used to, but a new normal.
Yeah, I just think that more sporting organizations could have used this time to do a little bit more online.
Agreed.
And it was just a perfect opportunity to get people because everybody was home. People still are glued to their screens, etc. I just thought that more could have been done.
More could have been done, and I think again, where I said earlier about reaching out to persons, in the pandemic, we saw quite a few sport-based, either YouTube channel or podcast popping up. Collaborate with more persons that are actually interested in the space to, even if you don't have the expertise within the organization, collaborate to be able to reach a new market and also to boost your own brand. And as I said, I don't think that there has been enough of that done. But as the pandemic has shown us, we still have a lot of time in this pandemic, so we still have a lot of time to rectify that.
Talk to the listeners and viewers about other things. We didn't even talk about this before we came on air, but I know you and I and the team, the JFA's media team, we had put on webinars, and two of the bigger issues that we had looked at are certainly safeguarding children in sport and female athletes and menstrual cycle. Those are two areas that need more discussion. Do you think that we need to have more of those, use this downtime, quote unquote, to have more of those kind of discussions and, things that are affecting athletes that we don't always discuss on a normal day because we're just so much into competition and training?
I agree 100%. I mean, when we did the forums and webinars last year, the response was overwhelming. Persons were like, I've always wondered about this in terms of female athletes and their menstrual cycle, or I've always wondered how do we foster an environment for children to thrive in sports, and for us to change the environment to become a healthier one for children in sports. I do think that it should and it still can be done where more of this is discussed and led from the front by sporting organizations, because they're the ones that organize all of the things that athletes participate in, and athletes are the most important the most important resource within that ecosystem, because they're what keeps all of this going. So we need to focus on the issues that affect them in the day-to-day. Each day goes by so fast you may not be able to sit down and focus on it, but now is the time for us not to just talk about it, but also to train our coaches, train all the stakeholders within the sporting industry on how to do things better, so that when we do come out of the pandemic, we are treating our athletes in a way that will foster better performances and also healthier beings mentally and overall.
Yeah, and that is so crucial. No, something you said before I asked that question, which ties into everything, is this pandemic has not ended and won't be ending anytime soon. Rosheika, what do you think are some of the things that may just continue for a while that will be here with us, that sporting organizations need to keep in mind? And I think some of those webinars that you were talking about are part of it, and the athletes, etc. But it's a two-part question. Do you think a lot of these will continue even after we go back to the new normal? And in a way, what do you think are some of the things that will stick around and go nowhere?
I do think that some of it will continue. What I think should continue is that we have to move to a digital space. Regionally, we're not doing as well as our international counterparts with using the internet and what is available to bring our sports to different platforms. We tend to rely on traditional media, but now is the time to seize the opportunity, get the resources such as the cameras, etc., get persons within the organization trained on how to, and get persons who have the resources and who have the expertise in how can we bring the sport even when we are back to having fans within the space, bringing the sport to a digital space regionally, and not just rely on reading it in the Gleaner or seeing it in TVJ Sports News, just to have it in different ways to for persons to consume. In terms of the forums and webinars, etc., I think it is important. The US has shown us that, especially in certain specific sports like gymnastics, where it shows that the longer you deny or the longer you ignore these issues, when it implodes, it's not just going to be a small storm. It's going to take over and it's going to disrupt the sport as you know it. And I think that if we continue to take these important steps, we won't implode like what happened in the US. And the truth is that we cannot deny that we do have a lot of issues in safeguarding children in sports, in protecting female athletes, and in protecting athletes' rights overall. And this should not go to the back burner when things return to normal. It should continue that we have this conversation consistently, and not just a conversation, but also to train our persons regularly. Not train them once and that's it. In the US, a lot of my friends from high school tell me that they have sensitivity training every 6 months. We need reinforcement. Reinforcement is important because every year you have new persons entering the different sports. So it's important that we are always reinforcing how to treat our athletes in a way that shows them that sports stakeholders care about them, how to treat them in a way that will enable them, when they do leave the sports, that they don't leave damaged or traumatized, but they are actually able to contribute to society and also to the sporting industry.
One of the big things coming out of this, Rosheika, we want to talk about is welfare of athletes and how the support systems that are needed for them moving forward. There's no need for more funding. There's no need for more, psychological support, etc. What do you think would be some of the support either government or non-governmental organizations need to now look to give athletes and coaches, if possible, coming out of this, because a lot of them aren't earning, won't be earning anytime soon, and might I add, whenever they get back their job per se in terms of coaches, etc., it may not be what they're used to, and some will not get back their jobs. So across the Caribbean, what kind of support you think is needed for athletes and officials coming out of all of this?
Well, one, for athletes especially, they need financial assistance first, one, but they also need to learn. We need to have a formal way of educating our athletes about management of their finances. A lot of our athletes would have been caught even the ones that have their contracts that have been caught flat-footed by the pandemic. I mean, the average person would have been, but the average person does not earn what an athlete earns. The impetus coming out of the pandemic should always to be prepared for the eventualities, because the truth is that nobody expected the pandemic to be what it is now. But this has taught us all a lesson that we don't know what's coming around the corner. And so that's something that I believe that we should focus on in terms of officials. I believe that our government has to, a lot of our officials don't have actual sports management. I don't believe in government actually interfering, but I believe in terms of policy, we need to have formal ways of guiding sporting organizations to give them the tools to actually have organizations that are able to support themselves, to be able to put together, for example, to be able to lobby for funds or to put together proposals, to be able to tap into the international resources that are available if you have your books together, if you have you meet certain criteria. So I think in terms of policy, that is where we need to move to for training, and also for us to be able to access funding, not just locally and regionally, but internationally, by always being prepared to do that. And I think those are the things that we have lacked in, and that's why the sporting industry isn't where it is, and that's what we need to look forward to.
I thought I would get your opinion on this. The the JFF and the new Premier League body, well, certainly the new Premier League body has been able to get funding, and they seem to be on the right track in terms of trying to get that funding for the league. What are your, and this is talking about now the Jamaica Premier League, it will be called. What's your view on that? What you think about it? I know you follow Chelsea, and that's not something good for you to get into a discussion about football. But in general, what do you think that means for our football locally?
I think it means that it's a new opportunity for football locally. What I want to see is actually an investment in football clubs and in the facilities that our football players actually train and play on. Our football fields, even though the field that our reggae boys compete on in international games, still isn't up to standard. It's very good that we've actually had so many sponsors stepping up in a pandemic, but where the funds will go outside of the operations of the league is what is actually crucial right now. How are we going to maintain our fees and maintain our players? A lot of players in the Premier League actually have jobs, and I believe that our Premier League will not be it's a semi-professional league now. It won't be a professional league until our athletes are able to survive on the payments that the wages they get from the football clubs. And so that is one of the things that I am looking forward to, given they have new management for the league itself.
Yeah, I mean, like here, Stefan, we talked about this in the year in review, and we are talking about things we're looking forward to. I think I would hope that they get enough funding that can, trickle down to the players in a big way, because what people don't know is that you do have people in the Jamaican Premier League who are making, close to minimum wage based on the scale, and it depends on which club, affordability of the clubs to pay the athletes. So I'm not even sure if it is a semi-professional league, but some of the footballers, etc., what they're being paid is almost like they're amateurs not getting paid. Yep. It's almost like a stipend. So hopefully they can get something out of all of that. Anything else, Rosheika, that you're looking forward to coming out of this as we move forward in terms of close to the end of, well, not the end of the pandemic, but over probably the next few weeks leading into our next Producers Corner?
Locally, I'm hoping that we actually get a specific timeline from our government regarding the restart of sports, and also some special provisions for our athletes and our coaches so that they are able to train properly, and so we can actually see how are we going to prepare our next generation of athletes for what is to come. So that is what I'm looking forward to. Regionally, I'm hoping that the same will be done, because we are not having many competitions regionally, and that is going to be to our own detriment, not just in terms of competing internationally, but sport is not just for professional gain, but in terms of health and wellness, it's crucial to any society. And I really hope that we'll be able to see some light at the end of that tunnel. I don't know when we will be fully vaccinated as a region, and so we have to, as our Prime Minister has said, learn to live within the pandemic. Yes, please.
To get you in any trouble or get myself in any
Please
trouble.
don't.
So I'll just leave it there because we have some very good listeners, and I don't want them to stop listening. Rosheika Grant, thanks again. I wish I could tell you all the best in the English Premier League, because I actually don't.
I think you should worry
You
about
know, so
Liverpool. Worry about Liverpool.
we're well, at the time that we're making this recording, Liverpool is by far ahead of Chelsea, even when we don't have any player to play. I mean, that's the thing about it. I'm gonna say that. So Liverpool has had injuries and people can't play and people foot, broke and all of them stuff, and we're still ahead of Chelsea and Arsenal. And I do not get for the life of me. This is not you now, Rosheika. How Arsenal fans get into liming people. Arsenal fans, I don't get it. I cannot get it. You're the first ones to jump and send us messages when our teams lose. I don't get it. I honestly don't get it. Rosheika Grant, thanks again for coming on the podcast, on this episode of the podcast. Guys, Rosheika is on social media, so you can check her there. She's on Instagram, Rosheika Grant. She is on